Oh, hey guys, I didn't see you there. Just kidding, I'm actually talking to a camera, but welcome to my home office, and welcome to this new format that I'm calling Design With Me. Now, you won't actually be designing with me, but what I thought that I'd do is take you guys through the process of making things. Now, we designers, we are involved in lots of different projects, big and small, and in all of those things, usually we tend to only share the end result, the stuff that we put in our portfolio, all the juicy, nice bits. And I thought that's kind of a shame. It leaves a lot of stuff on the table, right? It leaves all the initial work, the research, the sketching, all the time spent in Photoshop or whatever tool that you use. So with this format, I really wanted to take you guys behind the scenes and show you that whole spectrum of tasks, all of those different things that we do. Now I'm going to show you actual real projects, things that I've made for people. And the way that works is that I'll film while I'm working on projects that make sense to show you, and when the project is delivered, I'll ask for the client's consent to actually create a video about it. And for this first installment of Design With Me, I've got a fantastic project lined up. Now, I've got this guy who have written me and asked me to do a Mac app icon, and I thought this is a perfect opportunity to show you guys some of the stuff that goes into creating an icon like that. So let's make something. So this project pretty much starts the same way as most of my client projects do. I got an email. So I get this email from a guy who's designing a Mac app called Filter Designer. Now that might actually not be what you think it is. This is an app for engineers designing digital filters. And we go through this initial process that I take all of my clients through, and it's this conceptual phase where we kind of try to hammer out what is it that we're doing, what is the goal of this whole thing. I just quickly want to spend a few moments just talking about that conceptual phase that is so often overlooked when we present creative work. I think there's this misconception when you approach a creative professional that the designer is supposed to have all the answers, or this treasure trove of ideas that just come flying out every time we open our mouths. And that's really not the case, right? It's even to a point where when you discuss things with clients, they're kind of holding back on their own ideas because they don't want to pollute your ideas. And what I usually do is just come right out and ask them if they have any existing ideas for this product. Like, did they discuss this with anybody else? Did they do any back of the napkin sketches? Have they got any existing design files? I usually ask my clients to show me 5 different things that they like and 5 different things that they don't like, just to home in on what it is that they actually want. What is it that they're visualizing when they're seeing the result of this collaboration? And that is exactly what it is. It is a collaboration between the designer and the client. It is not the client approaches the designer and the designer just comes up with the answers, right? You cannot design in a vacuum. So your first task is usually to kind of break down that misconception and start up a collaboration process. I do all of my client communication via email. Now, I think a lot of stuff falls through the cracks when you do Skype meetings. I'm not a huge fan of verbal communication because so many things kind of just slips through the cracks. When you force people to put their thoughts into the written word, it kind of solidifies what it is that they want, and it makes it a lot more actionable in a way. It also makes it documented and it makes it searchable. So I try to do most of that initial phase via email, just exchanging a few emails. One of the big truths about being a designer is actually that I tell people that you're a professional mind reader, right? It's your job to pull out whatever information is in your client's head about their perceived success of the project and sift through those ideas and then figure out things that have value. And your value is then, knowing what renders well and what makes a great brand or a great icon or a great website. So that's where you kind of apply your skills, right? But it's not designing in a vacuum or coming up with ideas all by yourself. So I always have that conversation up front with my clients, just basically a few emails back and forth, trying to get at the core of what it is that we're trying to do here and what they visualize as sort of the success criterion. Also, I want to just add that there's just a bunch of things that we designers don't know about, right? The client is the domain expert. They know stuff that we couldn't possibly know. For example, in this case, It is a very technical app, and it has a lot of graphs and curves and functions. And what I found out from discussing it with the client, but also a quick stint around Wikipedia on digital filters, is that a central theme is this sync curve or sync function, which has these wonderful contours, and putting that into the icon made a lot of sense, because that's a central object. That's something that the engineers building this thing understands and works with. So that is something that I would never have come up with myself as a designer. That would have taken a lot of research anyways. So it is a collaboration between the client and the designer. I hope that makes a lot of sense. In any case, in this project, the client luckily had a whole bunch of ideas up front, and seeing as it was a very technical Mac app, he kind of looked a lot at the Xcode app icon. You all know it. It's the blueprint one with the hammer, right? There's some physicality to it, and that's kind of where we started out. And what we did was we shot a few emails back and forth, and then I went straight into sketching. And I had this idea of sort of this tablet kind of look with the sync curve in it. I did a few sketches, sent those over, and he didn't like them. Which is actually fine, that's great. I always try to encourage people to sketch pretty early on and show that to clients. I usually describe it as the first shot fired in a project. And for the client to come to a conclusion that this isn't something they want is almost as valuable as finding the right concept. So usually what that leads to is another round of sketches, and it also did in this case. And from there we agreed that we wanted to have something that looked even more similar to the Xcode icon. So basically using the same perspective, the same piece of paper, and then we needed to figure out where the developers have the hammer. We need to figure out another physical object that would be there resting next to that graph piece of paper, right? We pretty quickly homed in on the idea of having a pen there, right? What's the tool of the engineers? Okay, that might be a pen. Then we discussed what type of pen would be there, right? I had a bunch of pens lying around here at the office. I showed some of the pens to the client. We discussed the pros and cons of having them, and we decided on this ballpoint plastic, almost acrylic see-through pen with the ink inside it. You know the type, right? There's multiple reasons why we went with that. First of all, it's not a fancy pen, right? It's not a pen that you'd sign a piece of paper with. It's a workman's pen, right? It's everywhere. It's something that would be lying on the desk of an engineer's work table, right? Also, from a creative perspective, I was kind of looking forward to the potential of having a see-through pen with ink inside it and reflections of the light and the refractions inside the object. It made the most sense in terms of an actual tool that people would use, and it made the most sense in terms of aesthetics, in terms of what I thought would render well. So once we agreed on that sketch, we pretty much jumped into Photoshop, and I actually time-lapsed the whole process of me fleshing the things out in Photoshop, and I'm not going to show you all of that because otherwise we'd be here all day, but I'll speed it up and I'll narrate parts of the process that I think will be interesting as we go through just kind of creating the icon in Photoshop. Let's take a look. And jumping right in here, what you see is we've got a 1024 by 1024 pixel Mac app icon canvas, the largest size that we need to create. I've already created the graph piece of paper that's going to serve as the foundation for the actual icon. You see the sync curve there that I talked about earlier. And what I'm doing now is I'm laying out the core shapes of the pen. And my approach when creating any sort of object is that I will start to just create the central geometric shapes that the object consists of. So just using squares or circles or rounded corners, and then using the pen tool to edit those things just to see the overall shape and size and layout of the whole piece. It is a lot easier to make top-level adjustments to the whole composition of the piece before you start adding details. So I always do that first, just kind of getting the main geometric shapes in place. And what I'll do next is that I'll start to add details. I'll start to add textures to the metallic tip. I'll start to create this see-through plastic material. I'll create the ink that goes inside of the pen. And basically start to work with lighting and reflections and just putting the pen into the world somehow. And if you look closely, what you'll see is that most of this is vector shapes. Vector shapes with various blending modes applied. Slowly, what you can see is that this 3D shape kind of emerges from these basic 2D shapes of nothing. And what usually happens at this stage, once I have the basic shapes in place and once I have some sort of rudimentary rendering, is that I'll play around with the rendering. I'll play around with different ideas or concepts that I might have. In this case, you'll see I'll play around with colors, I'll play around with the exact rendering of the pen and the type of pen and the details on the pen. And particularly, I spend a lot of time just playing around with lighting and reflections, trying to make it look just right. And what you can see here is that I'm comparing it to the Xcode icon, which is kind of like the holy grail for this project. It is the icon that the client really liked, and he wanted it to sort of mesh with it, or at least feel like they were part of the same world. You can see that it's clearly inspired by this icon. The layout is pretty much the same. It's the same composition. I'm trying to really look at how the lighting and the colors and the tonality of the Xcode icon and how I can translate that into the filter designer icon. Now what you're seeing here is obviously a very compressed timeline. This is probably 2 or 3 days of work. And in the meantime, there's actually some client communication. There's a few emails back and forth showing the process. And we decide that there's a few details that we'd like to fix. In this case, the actual tip of the pen could use some work. But generally in this last phase here, I'm just really working on the details and trying to make sure that the lighting is just the way I want it. It's really tricky when you fake 3D objects in this way that I'm actually faking it here. I'm drawing a 2D shape and then I'm just pretty much manipulating pixels until it looks 3D. It's very easy to get something wrong. Now, some people have asked me, why don't you use Cinema 4D or some other 3D application? And maybe someday I will, but I actually think there's something romantic about drawing 3D shapes from 2D objects. And I really think that it contributes to my style. It's not hyper-realistic. You can see that it's drawn. It has this cartoony feel to it. You also want it to feel slightly realistic. You don't want anything to feel out of place. You just kind of want it to exist in that limbo between something that actually is physical and realistic and just looks like a picture and something that actually looks like it was hand-drawn. Like, most of the work really goes into this part of the process, and I think you can tell when you're looking at this time lapse is that I am just manipulating tiny little things, little shadows, little pieces of lighting, just to make sure that I feel like it sits right with me when I look at it. Many times I will leave it and then come back to it an hour or two later just to kind of look at it with fresh eyes. I'll show it to people around me, and they might point out like completely obvious mistakes or things that looks out of place. And that's the process I go through each time I try to make these 3D objects from 2D shapes. So this is the final result that the client approved. It's a see-through ballpoint pen with a vibrant blue ink resting on a piece of subtly graphed paper featuring the sync curve. The icon fits neatly with the rest of the professional-grade Mac apps and somehow manages to be both clean and vibrant. If you like this behind-the-scenes look, please make sure to subscribe and leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, guys.